Hi, this is Kelly from paperbeadrollers.com, and in today's tutorial you're going to learn how to make this paper bead cuff bracelet. This bracelet is made with 2 paper beads like this that are meant to go together kind of like a puzzle piece perfectly. One has 2 bumps, one has 3 bumps, and they just fit together exactly. Then you attach those beads to this frame to create this cuff bracelet. Are you ready for the tutorial? Let's get started. The tools and supplies you need include 2 different styles of paper, a green paper bead roller from paperbeadrollers.com, white glue for making the beads, a hardening glaze like this diamond glaze to seal and harden your beads. For the bracelet, you need a cuff bracelet frame like this one you can get from paperbeadrollers.com. I'll put the link in the video description. You need a light jewelry wire, about 26. And for this form, you'll need approximately 27 paper beads. If you want to make the ends of the beads metallic like mine, you'll need some embossing powder like this Wow brand and a heat tool. You'll also need a translucent ink pad. You'll need some wire cutters, jewelry pliers, and I'm using a wire rounding tool to make sure the ends of my wires aren't sharp. First, we'll roll the paper beads. There are 2 beads in this project, and you can purchase the digital download template at paperbeadrollers.com. I'll put the link in the video description. The download pack includes PDF files that you can print on your home printer, SVGs that you can use with various cutting machines, and files for the Brother Scan and Cut. Now, I will give you some basic measurements if you want to try and make these beads yourself, but they aren't straight cuts, so you may find recreating them a bit tricky. The width of the bead is 2 inches. The small prongs on either side are 5 inches long and about 3/16 inch where they separate. Now you can see how they curve down and end in a point. This is the same on both beads. The longer prongs are about 11 inches long and the width is 5/8 of an inch wide. Now you can space them evenly along the width of the bead. I'm using that green roller from paperbeadrollers.com, which is the smallest roller I sell. Unfortunately, this paper is a little wider than the rolling pin, so I'll show you the technique I use to make sure it curls right. I'm going to curl over one side and then flip the strip and roll from the other side. This gives it a start so it rolls nice and evenly. I'll roll this first section until I get to the splits in the paper. I'm going to roll these prongs one at a time, starting with the center prong. As annoying as it is, I'm going to let the other prongs just flap around and try to keep them out of my way as I roll. Now you can play around with this and try different tactics, but I'm going to roll this one around to the center. You'll need to keep these as centered as possible if you want your beads to fit together like a puzzle. If one of the bumps is slightly off center, they won't fit together nicely onto the bracelet form. Now I'm going to roll the other 2 larger bumps. I'm going to speed this up in the video so you don't have to wait so long. to use a light touch on the shorter prongs. They're so thin that they're very easy to rip off. I roll these so that the edge of the strip is aligned with the outside edge of the bead. I also found it's easier to keep it in place as you roll if you line it with the glue right from the beginning. Roll slowly and carefully, not pulling too much on the prong. Now I'm going to slide the bead up a little so I have some room to work, and I'll do the same with the other side. And there we are, the bead is finished. The double bump bead is rolled in the exact same way, but it does feel a bit different because you've got fewer prongs and more room in between each, but it does work exactly the same way. And there you are, 2 beads that fit together. Now I like to brush my glaze on versus dipping, but you can use whatever method works best for you. When you put these beads onto your toothpicks, be very careful. They will bend in between the bumps if you put too much pressure on them. Now we'll brush on diamond glaze. I recommend 3 coats of glaze because you want these beads to be very hard so that the thinner parts hold up well. Just brush a nice light coat on first. Make sure there are no globs or drips. With this shape, you are likely to get some drips that will dry in place if you're not careful. So keep the first coat nice and thin. Be sure that you get the ends. And if you need to, use a toothpick to keep the bead hole clear and open. Do 3 coats and let them dry thoroughly. And now I'll show you how to emboss the ends. I'm going to use Wow embossing powder in gold to make the ends of my beads shiny. I'm going to roll the edge of the bead onto the ink pad, just covering the place where I want the gold to be. Then I'll dip the end of the bead into the embossing powder. Tap off any excess powder. Make sure the powder isn't plugging the bead hole. If it is, you can use a toothpick to get it out. It will be impossible to remove this once it's heated and hardened. Now it's time for the heat. Be careful to control your heat gun and only put the heat directly on the embossing powder. If you get the glaze too hot, it may bubble up and crystallize. Now, I like to hold the bead at an angle a few inches away from the heat gun. I also keep the bead moving at all times. Don't hold it in one place too long or you could scorch it. If you get a big bubble in your embossing, let it cool for a second and then hit it with just a little bit of the heat again to flatten it out. If you missed any spots with the embossing powder, you can always repeat the process to make sure you have good coverage. So you're going to do this to both ends of all of your beads. And now you're ready to make the bracelet. Cut off 2 lengths of your wire, about 3 feet for each. We'll start by wrapping the ends of the wire onto the bracelet frame. Now I'm going to use my wire rounding tool to make sure the ends aren't sharp so they don't cut me. I'm going to wrap the wire around the end 4 times. I usually just wrap it with my fingers, and then I'll use my jewelry pliers to squeeze the wire together and make it look pretty. We'll also make sure that the end is down nice and tight. Now I'll do this with the other side, making sure they match. Choose your first 2-bump bead and line it up on the bracelet form. We'll start with the right side. Bring the wire around the end of the form and under the bead. Then wrap it up and over the bead. It'll be at a slight angle. And bring the wire around the outside of the form. Now you'll bring the wire up through the center of the form again and fold it over the right side of the form and out of the way. Time to work with the other side. We're going to repeat what we just did, but on the left. So bring the wire around the end of the form and under the bead. Then wrap it up and over the bead, and again at a slight angle. Bring the wire around the outside of the form. At this point, take a second to make sure that each side of the bead is placed evenly and straight on the form. If you start crooked, the entire bracelet will look crooked. Now bring the wire up through the center of the form again and fold it over the left side of the form and out of the way. Your first bead is done. Now choose a 3-bump bead. Make sure it fits nicely up against the previous bead. Now these beads are handmade, so sometimes there are going to be variations that can cause issues of how well they fit together. So you have to choose the right beads to go next to each other. Wrap this bead with the exact method we just used. I'm going to go over it one more time. So bring the wire up through the center of the form and over the end of the bead at a slight angle. Wrap it around the outside of the form. Bring back up through the center and fold over to the right and out of your way. We're going to repeat that on the left side. Bring the wire around the end of the form and under the bead. Then wrap up and over the bead at a slight angle, bringing the wire around the outside of the form. Bring the wire up through the center of the form again, fold it over the left side and out of the way. Your second bead is done. You're just going to keep adding beads this way for the entire bracelet. Now I'm going to go until I get to the first cross piece and then I'll show you how I handled it. The only issue with the cross piece is that it might force the bead to be slightly higher than the other beads. So your best bet is to kind of push the other beads back so you have just enough space to fit this bead in front of the crossbar. You're going to use the same wrapping technique that we've been using. Just treat the crossbar as a part of the bead. Now I'm going to go ahead and finish putting all of my beads on, and I'll meet you at the end to show you how to finish. Once the last bead is on, I'll wrap my wire down and around the corner of the frame and wrap it around 4 times, just like we did on our start. Since it's so short, I need to use my jewelry pliers to get it wrapped. Unfortunately, my wire is just a little bit too short. See, even the people who make these tutorials have problems. I'm going to come back and fix that at the end. For the right side, I'm going to clip this wire so it's easier to work with, making sure I leave enough to finish this time. Wrap it 4 times around. I'll round off the end with my rounding tool and press it flat with my plier. Okay, so here's my fix for this other side. I took a short piece of wire and I looped it back onto the frame right before this last bead. Then I just wrapped it the 2 extra times around to make it even with the other 3. And voila, the bracelet is ready to wear. It can be gently adjusted to fit any size wrist. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Make sure that you subscribe to the channel to see when my next tutorial comes out. And you can also join us over on Facebook in the Paper Bead Fanatics group. I hope to see you there so I can see pictures of all of the fabulous things you're making. See you next time.